Hi, this is Nalini Elkins with Industry Network Technology Council. Let me tell you a couple things about our organization first. We are a nonprofit industry and academia organization. Our goal is to teach industry and anyone who's interested, basically, about the internet standards and other things that impact us so much. And of course, today, all the stuff around PQC and cryptography is one of the biggest things impacting us. We partner with the India Internet Engineering Society. They are a nonprofit based out of India. Their goal is to expand the capacity for Indian folks to join the IETF, and therefore, whatever learning they can get in this arena, that is very good. We've done a bunch of series in this for INTC before. We've gotten some grants both from Aaron and APNIC, the Internet Registries. We focused quite a bit on IPv6 deployment, aiming it at enterprises. We've done webinars in security, intro to that sort of thing. Our just previous session was about new work at the IETF, and this time we are doing quantum. And so we've had 2 sessions now, introducing you and ideally making it so that you have an understanding of some of the terms Vadim will talk about. Let's talk a little bit about Vadim. He's at IBM Research. And of course, the reason that we're talking to him so much is that some of the foundational things, the algorithms for cryptography that were accepted by NIST are, of course, MLChem and MLDSA, of which he was one of the co-authors. So without further ado, let's hear from Vadim.
Okay. So thanks very much. Happy to talk to you guys today. So I'll talk about, I guess many people here have varying interests. So I'm not exactly sure what to focus on. I have a lot of small things, small topics that we go from one to another. And if you find some part boring, maybe in 5 minutes it'll be a completely different talk. So hopefully there's something for everyone. Let's start with just definition of cryptography. So just spend 2 minutes on it. So it allows for secure communication in the presence of malicious parties. And of course, the security of cryptography does rely a little bit on how much power an adversary has. So if he has a basic computer or a supercomputer, it should make some difference. But if cryptography is designed properly, then a large increase in the adversary's computing power will require only a small increase in the key size. The best we could hope, for example, is that if the adversary's computing power goes up by a factor of 2, then we only need 1 extra bit in the key, because the key size also doubles with 1 extra bit. So all this is well and good, and we know how to design cryptography like this. But the problem is that quantum computing kind of sits outside the standard model of computation, the Turing machine model. So the quantum computers disprove the extended Church-Turing thesis. The Church-Turing thesis says that anything that be computed by this Turing machine can be computed on a much more complicated computer. And the extended Church-Turing thesis says that there's actually only just a polynomial time difference between a super powerful computer and just this basic Turing machine. So no matter how good of a computer you get, you're not going to get much more powerful except polynomial time. But of course, quantum computers disprove this because there are some things they can do in polynomial time that would take exponential time for a regular computer. So now cryptography, the principle falls apart, that we can't just increase the key size by 1 bit and hope we double the hardness for the adversary. So there's 2 types of cryptography. One is symmetric key cryptography, where 2 parties come together and they have a secret key S that they share. They come apart, they can talk in the presence of the adversary. So all of that is nice and good and nice and fast, and this is what we want to be using. I guess the question is, how do they share this secret key S if they've never met before? And the symmetric cryptography still exists when quantum computers are built. But public key cryptography is what solves this problem of sharing the secret key. So what happens is to send the message, Bob wants to send Alice a message. So what he does is he creates a secret and a public key P where they're somehow algebraically connected. And then he sends the public key to everyone. And then Alice can send him a message and completely securely. And that'll be the secret key that they share, the common key that they share, even in the presence of the adversary. So the adversary cannot know what it is. And now the effect of quantum computers is that symmetric key cryptography, like I said, is fine. AES, SHA, they're all okay. Maybe you have to increase the key size to 256 instead of 128. But even that's arguable. Staying at 128 may be enough for a long time. Now, public key cryptography is a different story. So everything that has been used up until a few years ago is actually broken. This is because public key cryptography needs mathematical assumptions. Between the secret key and public key, there has to be some algebraic relationship, and in order for the public key cryptography to work. So the assumptions that have been used, for example, factoring is hard. If I give you two primes P and Q, you can multiply them easy enough, but to figure out what P and Q are from their product is a hard problem. Also, discrete logarithm is hard, g to the x equals y and recover x, or the equivalent problem on elliptic curves. And these are mostly problems from number theory. And they are all, they all seem difficult for classical computers, but broken once quantum computers are built. And why do we care about quantum computing right now, even though there is no quantum computer yet? It's because mainly the problem is this harvest now, decrypt later attacks, which means that somebody can be recording all the communication now. They can't break it, but they store it because they think it'll be valuable maybe 5 to 10 years still. And then when they get a quantum computer, they will just break it. So this is the main worry about cryptography today are these harvest now, decrypt later attacks. So, of course, maybe as you all know, we don't need quantum to defend against quantum because quantum computers are not really all powerful. They simply solve some problems faster. Most problems they do almost nothing with. So let's try to base cryptography on problems we don't think they solve. And this was the thesis of NIST, of the NSA, that said about 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, that quantum computers will exist sooner than we think, and we need to plan our cryptography transition accordingly. So in 2016, the NIST, they had a draft for proposals, and then they had the submissions were due in 2017 for encryption schemes and digital signatures. Of course, just because they said this competition started in 2017, 2016 with the announcement, doesn't mean there was no research beforehand. People were working on this quantum safe cryptography for maybe about 10 to 15 years beforehand, even before it was known as quantum safe cryptography. So the ideas were already in the research community. So this was the reason NIST its competitions are valuable and usually its winners are used a lot is because NIST makes very open competitions. So anyone from around the world is open to submit. Everyone from around the world kind of attacks these schemes, analyzes these schemes. It's all in the open. And at the end, NIST somehow selects the winners. And for example, AES and SHA-3, they came out of NIST, and the submitters were not American. So it truly is a global competition. Yeah, the analysis phase lasted about 5 years, and the winners were announced. And then the drafts, it took 2 years between the winner's announcement and NIST to draft standards, again, with the community's input. There were 3 standards that were drafted in 2024. So one was for encryption, ML-Chem, and 2 were for digital signatures, ML-DSA and SLH-DSA. There's going to be one more standard, and is standardized. It said they will standardize 2022. That standard hasn't been written yet. That's for another digital signature scheme. Then now we have the deployment phase. So the standards are written, so anyone really can just deploy them. And people are deploying them already. But the speed of this deployment, the speed of rolling out this cryptography is guided by orders to switch to this encryption. For example, the US government first said that by 2035, everything must be quantum safe. Now it got switched to 2030 and 2031. So the timeline has drastically shrunk. And this is because there is some suspected improvement in the development of quantum computers. They may exist sooner than we think. So now there's this deployment phase, and I think what will come later is the panic phase, because the orders came in, the deployment is not going as fast as I guess people expect, or it should go. And I think that we will reach a point when it's about maybe a year or half a year before the deadlines, and people will realize it's actually a bit harder to switch than people think. Sometimes whole systems have to be redesigned. You have to find the old cryptography to rip it out. And I think if one doesn't prepare, this could be a problem. So this could be a very interesting time, in my opinion, like 2030s, when it comes to transitioning. And now just a small advertisement of like what our group does, our research group at IBM Research does. So we are basically all in on quantum safe cryptography. So what our research, we are really focusing on, and not just the encryption in the signatures, but on more advanced primitives as well. But when it comes to encryption in signatures, we were pretty active participants. So we submitted 3 schemes to the original NIST competition, and there were 5 total selected, some backups, and so 3 of ours were selected. And now after that, NIST was still not fully satisfied with the diversity of assumptions when it comes for digital signatures. And so they asked, almost as soon as the first competition ended, they asked for additional digital signatures. And our group, and I'm not involved in any of these 4, so I was involved in the other 3, but nothing here. But our group submitted 4 schemes, and there were, again, a lot of digital signatures submitted, 50 again. And now it's still progressing. That it's not over. It's not going to be over for another couple of years, but still these 4 still exist. So yeah, so we do build these quantum safe. So we are, like I said, we're all in on this quantum safe transition in our research group at IBM. And now, of course, I would say that research-wise, encryption signatures, let's say, we know we can do it. So the interesting problem is, what about transitioning more complex protocols? So for simple protocols, for example, like TLS, you have encryption, you have signatures. And when I say classic, I mean the RSA, just the classical, something like that. So you have discrete log-based ones, you have elliptic curve-based ones, you have factoring-based ones. Well, transition them to encryption and signatures that are quantum safe. So you have MLChem and MLDSA. These are the new standards. So there's not much there to do. You just transition and it'll work. It'll be efficiency-wise, maybe it'll be a little different, but it'll work. And these standards, especially MLChem, is already used in many standards. So for the browsers, network providers, messengers, they already use these NIST standards. But when thinking about more advanced schemes, things get a little more murky, because more advanced schemes may use much more advanced foundational primitives. So they could use some blind signatures, anonymous credentials. If you don't know what they are, don't worry about it. It's not going to come in anywhere. I'm just saying this is something more advanced than just signature scheme and encryption. And they're all somehow, there's some interface. They interface with each other, and there's some rich algebraic structure that makes everything work nicely together. And if you try to do that quantum safe, transition this, and you say, we can build a quantum safe signature scheme, we can build quantum safe encryption, maybe they don't interact so nicely with each other, but okay, maybe we can make it work. What about a quantum safe OPRF? That's much less efficient. Quantum safe anonymous credential, also less efficient. The way they interact together maybe doesn't even make sense. And this can become much less efficient. And to the point where in real life, people may not want to use them at all. And this inefficiency kind of multiplies the more primitives you try to get to interact together. So you can't just say, oh, we have this more complicated scheme, and we're just going to plug in quantum safe primitives into it. That's not going to work. This is going to be a big part of this panic phase that I was alluding to earlier, that you can't just, this is not a plug and play transition. What one should do, and at least I think how one should transition, is as follows. So our goal our goal as a community, as a research group, whatever, is to create cryptography that gets used. So let's accept that. And the constraint that we found when talking to to people who actually deploy cryptography is that no one wants to use more cryptography than is needed. They want to be just secure enough, because adding cryptography can, if you add more complicated cryptography, you add a lot of, it has a monetary cost. You add a lot of transmission, you can add complexity, and people do not want to implement that if they don't need to. And the fact is that quantum safe cryptography is generally less efficient than classical cryptography based on elliptic curves. And so the obvious conclusion is, well, for now, let's only use quantum safe cryptography where and when necessary. So if someone says, look, I need to transition to quantum safe cryptography, what should I do? The answer isn't let's make everything quantum safe. You actually have to think a little bit about how to do this transition. And for this, you have to understand that there is roughly two types of cryptographic building blocks. You can divide all the building blocks into, let's say, roughly two areas. So one deals with encryption, and one is with authentication. So that's secrecy and authentication. So secrecy, like I said, needs to be secure now against future decryption. So you have to transition now. Okay? Whereas authentication, it just needs to be secure when you're doing this authentication. It doesn't have to be, I don't need to change my authentication scheme to be quantum safe if there's no quantum computer right now. Okay, so with this understanding, now there's a timeline. So let's say we have now, and now we don't have a quantum computer. So I would say quantum safe authentication is not needed. Then there will come a point when quantum computers break cryptography. So they break factoring, they break discrete log. And at this point, you will need quantum safe authentication, but maybe it's not needed everywhere. Maybe if quantum safe authentication is this online interactive thing where I have to authenticate myself to you, send me a request, and I have to authenticate myself to you within 1 second. Then the quantum computers, they cannot break factoring in 1 second. They take some days. Then maybe quantum safe authentication is not needed everywhere yet. But then there will come a point on the timeline when quantum computers can break classical cryptography in seconds, and then you need quantum safe everywhere. But in the meantime, the way you transition is the following. So now we have classical protocols, and then we should switch to protocols that are just secure against future decryption. So all the encryption is done, uses MLChem or whatever else you need to secure against the future, against these harvesting attacks. And then only once we're getting close to, and then of course some schemes should be fully quantum safe. And then once we get to where quantum computers are good enough to just break everything in seconds, then okay, you have to be fully quantum safe. So the point of this is to say that if someone says, I want to transition to quantum safe, the answer is not let's transition everything to quantum safe. You can do it in steps and do the most important steps first. So just to recap, how to design a system for the quantum safe future is one, understand what needs to be quantum safe now versus later. So encryption, quantum safe now, authentication, digital signatures, not yet. Then you design an efficient, fully quantum safe equivalent system, saying in the long future, this is what the system will look like. This is what I will need. But then you don't have to instantiate it right away. Just then you instantiate it with the quantum safe components that need to be quantum safe now. But then when you need to transition to fully quantum safe, there you can actually do plug and play. So basically right now our systems are not plug and play compatible with quantum safe components. So we want to design them so that they are. We don't have to instantiate them yet, but design them so that they are. That's step number 2. And then once you really need every component to be quantum safe, or once you need certain components to be quantum safe, you can plug in quantum safe components there. So this is how I believe, and I think a lot of the people we work with believe that this is how they want their systems designed for the quantum safe future. Okay, so just an example, I had nothing to do with this, but like even basic things like certificate chains are being changed the way they're done. So now if you have a root certificate, he signs another certificate, and that person signs another certificate, and all the signatures are given out one by one. But a quantum safe digital signature is already 3 kilobytes. And if you have to chain a few of them together, now you get 12 kilobytes pretty easily for 4 of them or something like this. So this is untenable. So even for something so basic as certificate chains, people said, no, let's change to Merkle tree certificates. And there's an IETF, I think it's IETF kind of proposal going around, and this is what's going to be used. And basically there, all the certificates get put into a trusted hash value. And now you can sign 1 million certificates with just 32 bytes per level. So that's, I guess, 32 times whatever log of 1,020,000 is. So that's already much cheaper. So basically the different characteristic of quantum safe cryptography already forced people to redesign something even so basic as a certificate chain. Because they said, this is quantum safe, we have to redo it. And for now, it's, this trusted hash value, I don't know if it gets signed, but it can get signed using non-quantum safe things or maybe a hybrid, but then in the future, it's just going to be quantum safe. Okay, we're also working, for example, with Signal, the messenger, and there we're saying, okay, they have to at some point do digital signatures on the key setup. And then we say, okay, and Signal really told us, look, we're paying a lot of money for communication. Can we reduce it? So we said, okay, we're going to try to use the standards that really reduce the communication. And then we will even try to go into your specific protocol and see if we can make it, reduce it even more for the specific thing. And hopefully we can standardize this outside of Signal, and also their private group management. The current scheme would be very inefficient with quantum safe components. So we had to rethink the protocol from the ground up. So I'm not saying Signal is going to implement any of this, but this is just saying, even if you look at basic things like certificate chains and things like Signal, which are very centrally managed in some sense, where they can really do all the cryptography themselves, it's already requires some thinking to do the transition. So much more complicated systems would be even more complicated, especially distributed, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this was the non-math part of it, and about getting the details of what quantum safe cryptography is. All right. So now let's just talk about the foundational cryptography and what is it based on, the quantum safe foundational cryptography, basically encryption scheme and signatures. Before they were based on factoring and discrete log, and now it's completely different stuff. So this is, I guess, for people who are a little bit interested in what does the implementation of this look like, what kind of operations are used. So this part of the talk is going to be about that. So 3 out of the 5 NIST standards, including both of the main ones, MLChem and MLDSA, are based on the hardness of lattice problems. So forget what a lattice is. Here's the hard problem intuition. Here's how I would present it. So let's say you have a matrix A, either square or taller or a tall matrix A. And then I multiply it by a vector with small coefficients, A times Y, and I give you Z, mod P. And then I take away the Y, and I ask you, can you find Y given A and Z? Of course, this is easy. You just use Gaussian elimination, you invert the matrix, and you found Y. And the smallness of Y's coefficient is not relevant here. Maybe it's relevant for the next part. So now here's the hard problem. Here's how to convert something that's completely trivial into a hard problem. How about we do A times Y, but I perturb the solution by 1 or 0, by a vector of small coefficients. So you have AY plus Z equals Z mod P. So now the question is, given A and Z, can I find Y and D? So all of a sudden, just by perturbing, so this Y and E is unique. And just by perturbing the answer AY, all of a sudden the problem becomes what we think is exponentially hard, even for quantum computers. Okay, and this is a pretty famous optimization problem as well before it became the basis of cryptography. And why is this lattice crypto? Okay, this is in 2 dimensions, but of course, lattices, should be in 1,000 dimensions. Basically, all solutions to AY plus E form a shifted lattice. So they form a regular grid. And so by asking to find the Y and the E with small coefficients, I'm actually asking is, now you have this grid defined by A, can you find the point closest to the origin? And this is the bounded distance decoding problem. So basically, you have a shifted lattice, shifted regular grid. That's what a lattice is. And I'm asking you to find the point closest to the origin. But anyway, this is only important to understand for cryptanalysis, but for constructing these schemes, often you don't even need to know what a lattice is. And so the two schemes are MLChem and MLDSA. They were part of this Crystal suite, the cryptographic suite for algebraic lattices that we submitted. And so we had Crystal's Kyber, which was a chem, which became MLChem. And then Crystal's dilithium, which was a digital signature scheme, and that became MLDSA. And they're all very easily implemented in constant time, no side channels. And they use the operations are also, again, pretty straightforward and quite similar between the two. So there's only two operations needed, and both are very fast. So one is evaluation of hash functions, like SHA-3. And the other is to be able to add and multiply in a polynomial ring. So this polynomial ring is just polynomials that are mod p and mod x to the 256 plus 1. So mod p, everyone knows what it is. It's just, whenever you see a p, you put 0, and x to the 256 plus 1, it's the same thing. Whenever you see x to the 256 plus 1, you make that equal to 0. So you multiply polynomials. Every time you x to the 256, the degree has grown. You write that as minus. That becomes -1. Anyway, that's what it doesn't matter. And so for Kyber, for all security levels, Kyber has a p that's around 13 bits, and dilithium has a p that's around 23 bits. And to increase security, just do more of the same operations. So the exact same hardware software can be reused. For example, for RSA, if you're going to be doing, or for elliptic curves, if you're going to be changing your curve to something bigger with a bigger degree, you would have to change the mathematics of it. Whereas in these schemes, MLChem and LDSA, you just do more of the same operations. So all the hardware and software is exactly the same. So just as an example, here's a ring. We'll be using this example for a few things later on. So let's say this is the ring Z17x mod x to the 4th plus 1. So all elements are degree 3 polynomials, because everything with degree 4 x to the 4th is -1. And the Zi are integers mod 17. So addition is just the usual coordinate-wise addition, but multiplication is polynomial multiplication followed by a reduction modulo x to the 4th plus 1. So like I said, if the degree grows beyond 3, so x to the 4th becomes -1. So this is the basic operations. You just plus and multiplication in this ring. So if I want to do, for example, some security level, whatever, blah, and then I have to multiply a matrix of these polynomials by a vector of polynomials and a vector of polynomials. So this looks just like what I was doing before when I defined this hard problem over the integers. This is just the same problem over polynomials. And so if I want to increase security, well, instead of multiplying a 3x3 matrix by a vector, I multiply a 4x4 matrix by a vector, and the security just goes up. So kind of the basic operations are the same. You just do more of them. This is what I meant. And so the operations are as follows. So additions are very easy and cheap. It's just component-wise, mod p. And to get cheap multiplications, it helps if we pick a special p. So what we want to do is we want to pick a p so that our x to the n plus 1 is factors completely or almost completely mod p. So, for example, and this is, if you know the Chinese remainder theorem, this is exactly that. So polynomials can be represented in two ways. One is the coefficient representation, and one is the polynomial modulo x minus r1, modulo all the products. So basically a polynomial modulo x minus r1, modulo x minus r2, etc. And modulo x minus r1 is the same thing as evaluated polynomial at r1. Okay, so this is exactly the Chinese remainder theorem, but in terms of polynomials. And now to multiply two polynomials together, this Chinese remainder representation, this f hat, becomes important. Okay, so if you want to multiply them, so multiplication using the number theoretic transform, the Chinese remainder method, or FFT, fast Fourier transform, all the same names, it's done as follows. So what I can first do is I can convert both polynomials that I want to multiply into their Chinese remainder form. So I convert f into f hat, g into g hat. And then I can multiply the polynomials in their Chinese remainder form. And the nice thing is, using these ring isomorphisms, is that actually I can multiply, it makes sense to multiply in the Chinese remainder form component-wise. So there I just multiply f, the F mod, X minus R1 times G mod X minus R1. So I do the multiplication component twice. And if they're integers, these F of R1, then it's just multiplying integers. And then what I do is I do the inverse transformation. I go from the Chinese remainder form back into the coefficient form. Step 3 is very efficient. Now, the actual multiplication is very efficient because I don't have to multiplication of polynomials. I would have to be like an n squared operation using the school book way. But now I can do it just component-wise. So it's just really n multiplications. And so the question is, how fast can I do the Chinese remainder going one way or going the other way? And the answer is actually very fast. It's so fast that it turned out that actually the main efficiency block in his ML Chem, for example, was computations of SHA-3. So that was actually I think it was more expensive because we were so haphazard with our, hash of this, hash of that, who cares? But it turns out that the multiplication was so fast that actually all these extra hashes that we had all over the place turned out to be the bottleneck. And so the reason it's so fast is, so here's an example. I'll just do it one way. So let's say we do mod x to the fourth plus 1. So we have x to the fourth plus 1. It factors into these 4 products. And I'll just show how to efficiently convert between the coefficient and the Chinese remainder representations. And this is the main part of polynomial multiplication. So here's how you do it. So let's say you want to do f, and the polynomial coefficient representation is mod x to the fourth plus 1. So what I want to do is I'm going to split it up into 2 parts. The first part is f mod x squared minus 4. The second part is f mod x squared plus 4, because x squared minus 4 times x squared plus 4 is x to the fourth plus 1, mod 17. And if I can get this f11, then I can split that one into whatever f11 mod x minus 2, f11 mod x plus 2, and the same thing for the other part. So of course, f11 mod x minus 2 is f of 2, and f11 mod x plus 2 is f of minus 2. So it's basically this recursive decomposition that I would like to do. Okay, and then the same thing for the other side. Okay, so now the way it's done is very fast. So let's say we have this polynomial, whatever, and I want to compute this polynomial mod x to the fourth, x squared minus 4, and this polynomial mod x squared plus 4. So remember, every x squared becomes 4. So whenever I see x squared, I plug in 4. And so they would both become this. And then I would just reduce them. But the point is that this can be done with I just have to add the components that are constant. So 1 and 3 times 4, and minus 4 and minus 5 times 4. So basically when I reduce them to have from 4 coefficients to 2 coefficients, I just have to sum up. I just have to fold them and sum them up. And then I continue the same way as before. So I just have to basically plug in the x squared equals 4 and then I evaluate that, and I just fold and sum up. And going backwards, I won't do it, but it's exactly the same thing. So the computation time, so the algorithm is very simple. And the computation time basically is, if you have log n levels, we have n over 2 integer multiplications. This is multiplying by this. When I plugged in x squared equals 4, you have to do these multiplications, and then n additions per level. So basically if you have log n levels and you have n over 2 multiplications and additions, you have a very efficient n log n algorithm. Yeah, so implementation for n equals 256, we had basically 6,000 cycles on a Haswell. And this Haswell, and the reason I did this is because that was the computer that was the processor that a lot of people evaluated their algorithms on back during the NIST competition. And okay, so the operation is actually very simple, and what encryption looks like is also very simple. So all we're doing is multiplying vectors by matrices. So it doesn't matter why it encrypts or decrypts, but key generation, you just generate a random matrix. You multiply A times S plus C, and 2 secret S and D, and you multiply AS plus C. So that's it. That's your public key, A and T. And then to encrypt, you basically are doing the same thing. You're generating a bunch of small polynomial vectors, and you're multiplying by A, and you're multiplying by T. So again, it's just vector matrix multiplication of these polynomials. Then you have a ciphertext, and decryption is again the same thing. You just do a vector inner product with itself, with the sequencer. And that's it. So that's what encryption looks like. There's a little bit of rounding in here and there, but the operations are these. Okay. And the signature scheme, it's a bit more involved, but it uses similar operations. At the base, it is similar operations. So the main thing about MLChem is that it's larger, but it's faster. So for example, if you have elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, its public key and ciphertext size is 32 bytes this is 128-bit security. For MLChem, it becomes 800 bytes at 768 bytes. But it's actually faster. So this is from a paper that I wasn't involved in from a while ago that basically computed not just the speed, but the average energy consumption of a PQ-TLS, of a TLS handshake. And it turns out that even though the signature scheme and the encryption scheme are they're much bigger, the fact that the computation is so efficient, actually, however you measure the energy, it's actually a bit less. So of course, this is not to say that, it's actually better. No, a lot of times communication is a problem. So people say, no, we don't want to transmit a kilobyte when we could have transmitted 32 bytes. This is much worse. And this is the reason we use Merkle. Now people are going to use Merkle tree certificates instead of certificate chains. But the point is that actually it's not, at least computation-wise, it's not as horrible especially MLChem is not as horrible as one would think it could have been just based on the output size. And this is all I wanted to say. And this does leave time for questions that hopefully I can answer.
Great. So let me, starting from the top, there's a bunch of questions around the whole efficiency and seeing that whether the quantum safe cryptography is less efficient than classical or more. And I guess there's a couple of questions around it. One is, what are we talking about in terms of efficiency? Is it like transmit time over the wire, computing power, or what? Can you discuss that a little more?
Yeah, I guess this is related to what I said at the very end. If we just look at encryption, it is actually more efficient if we just care about computational resources, like the computational power needed to do an encryption or a quantum safe versus classic like RSA or elliptic curve stuff. So if you don't care about anything except how much time it takes to create a ciphertext, then quantum safe is actually better. And maybe even signatures, it's about equal. But I think people start complaining when now you're transmitting 10 kilobytes, for example, if you want to do a TLS handshake, because you have a few signatures, a few encryptions, and now they're saying the way TLS is done, now you have packets and things don't fit into packets and et cetera. So they're saying, okay, now that's less efficient. We have to redo everything. So that's bad. So actually the size actually is an annoyance a lot. And this is going to just do basic foundational stuff like encryption signatures. When you do more complicated things, like I would say, like any privacy-based stuff, like anonymous credentials, and I don't want to go into like oblivious PRFs that is used a lot now for key management, that becomes just prohibitively expensive for quantum safe. It's kind of let's say not prohibitively, but there's no doubt it is much more expensive in everything, in time, in output size. So it's yes, it is faster when you just care about encryption, but that's kind of it. And it's not bad. Encryption is important, obviously. So that is a big thing that is good. It's not terrible. And actually more efficient in some ways. But when you get to anything more complicated, it's worse. And this is causing a big problem with transitioning the more complicated things or transitioning protocols that may use more than one component like encryption signatures. So maybe yes, or maybe it's not correct to say quantum safe is just always less efficient, but yeah, that's going to be a big part of the transition, saying, hey, the size is big, or you can do something more complicated, the speed is bad. So yes, it will come down, I think, a lot to efficiency.
Let's move into signatures because I actually did some studies. And I talked about them a little bit at the IETF that just passed. To cut to the chase here, I used MLDSA 44 keys, just plain, no Merkle tree or anything. And by the way, for everybody who's interested, we're going to put up some Merkle tree test systems and whatever. So just email me if you guys want to be interested. Look at that. But to cut to the chase, what I found was essentially in the order of 150 to 200 milliseconds for no Merkle tree stuff. A lot of enterprises, that's not a big deal. For Google or ad servers, sure. Maybe it is, but for long-lasting connections, if you're talking about 150 milliseconds, what the heck? But there's questions now about the whole digital signature thing, which is that signatures are also used for authentication. And for example, if you have a contract or like in digital Wall Street, if the gateways are using these signatures, so they're long lasting. And so can you speak to that a little bit about long lasting digital signatures?
What exactly do you want me to say?
I suppose it's like if they can be spoofed, because the question is you can't spoof the TLS connection because if that's right there and it takes more than seconds. But if I have a digital signature in a digital contract, so what happens to that if that can be broken? I guess that's a good question. It's like, well, what are you going to do once it's broken?
Yeah. So you mean if I have basically a factoring-based RSA signature in a contract, what happens?
Yeah.
I guess the contract becomes invalid. This is what the Bitcoin people are worried about now. Like what happens to all the addresses that are exposed? Basically, the meaning that you just need to break the digital signature to transfer the money, right? To use the address. What happens when there's a quantum computer that exists? Do we just invalidate these? Or do we, I don't know, what do you do? So the answer is you must transition whatever contracts you have now to contracts that are signed using some in a quantum safe manner. And the time for that is I would say now, because later it becomes, the contract is invalid, I would say.
That's very interesting. One of the other things I think it comes into this play is like, it's cost. Sure, let's say that a quantum computer is available and you can do it in seconds. The question is, maybe you can talk to this. What I suspect will be done is we'll have quantum computing breaking as a service. And because not everybody will have one. So who's going to have one? And so the smartest thing to do for such a person or country would be to offer it as a service, and you can buy it for whatever nefarious purpose you want. But then there's the cost. So it's like, how much does it cost per second to get this service? Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make any sense to you?
Of course. So this is what I was also alluding to a little bit in the middle of the presentation, saying, even when we have quantum computers that can break things, maybe they won't be fast enough. And you're saying maybe they'll be too expensive. Okay, this quantum computing as a service, I would guess that the companies that will have the quantum computers will I don't know if it'll be possible to try to prevent people from using it to break, to run whatever Shor's algorithm. I don't know if it's possible. And it seems like maybe they will check to see what exactly are you doing. That could be a thing in the beginning where they say, hey, look, we don't just give it to anyone. So you cannot just submit a circuit and then we do it blindly. Maybe at first they will, especially if we know a lot of cryptography still rests on classic encryption schemes. They will maybe be a little hesitant to give it away. But I'm not sure that solves any problem, because you will have nation states that, of course, just break whatever they want. And they could also sponsor hacking groups, the nation states. So I feel like once quantum computer is there, it's there. You're not say, the bad guys don't have access to it. They probably do. We can't assume something like this. People will, So it's a very fluid thing that I would say the only thing to do is just to transition. There's nothing.
No, just transition. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll send you an email later because we're trying to figure out, we're going to trying to get some industry and government groups together to have some consortiums and actually meet. And because there's so much cross-border stuff now, half the banks in India are from the US. And to everybody who's on the call, send me a note if you want to be involved in some of those things, because we're really trying to help in this whole area. That's why we have this series, is to have more, to spread the knowledge and spread exactly what you need to do. And to that end, we're also going to be setting up some test systems that people get their hands on. If you want to help, just let me know. But if you can talk a little bit to zero knowledge proofs and quantum safety, that would be real good. I think that was a question that came in.
Yeah, so that's a very active topic. So there is already a lot of zero knowledge proofs that are already quantum safe by default. So for example, I'll say these hash-based proofs that I think a company called Starkware, for example, that are pretty closely aligned with Ethereum, they work on, that was quantum safe by default, and they're very fast. The reason that they were using hash-based proofs is because they're very fast verification. And the quantum safety was a little bonus that they got. Something that we're working on in our group a lot, and other people as well, is trying to get these quantum safe hash-based proofs, which are already quite good, make them even faster by changing the mathematical assumptions. For example, lattice-based assumptions, just like MLChem and MLDSA. And they are to hope to get it even faster or even smaller for succinctness. So succinctness is also important. How big is your proof? So yeah, I think that there's nothing there that if you have something that you have zero knowledge proofs now, quantum safe ones, they won't be as short, because now you have some short ones. You can prove an arbitrary circuit with 3 group elements, 3 discrete log group elements, which will not happen in the quantum safe world, but that's okay. I don't think it's one of these things that just will not exist when quantum computers are built. No, we'll have lattice. We'll have quantum safe zero knowledge proofs. It already exists, and maybe they'll be even better later, but
No, it's very interesting. You were talking a bit about a signal. And I know at the IETF, people are doing, there's MLS, message layer security. I think that was based way in the back. I think some of the folks from Signal, maybe Telegram, came in. But that's the protocol that has been standardized for messaging at the IETF. So that's very interesting to see. I don't recall I don't know if Signal has switched. Do you know what I'm saying? Am I making sense to you about the question, I guess?
So I don't know about MLS, but I would say I only picked Signal because they're, I would say, very nice to work with, because they have the people implementing their protocols also understand cryptography very well. So we can talk to them. So it's easy to communicate, here is the things we would like to change. Then they say their requirements because they understand cryptography. And so working with them is really great. And that's one of the reasons we do it. And of course, there are protocols that then get picked up. So that's the reason. It's not like one cannot do it for some other protocol. You can. It's just you have to then talk to the people who are working on those protocols too. And maybe they're not as cryptographically kind of inclined as the Signal people.
Or mature. So I wonder, do you work with IETF very much? Because I know we have a crypto forum research group. If not, I'd love to have you connect with those folks if that is of interest to you.
We have people from IBM, from my research in Zurich, who do participate in IETF a lot, where I personally do not. I'm more on the design part. And something interesting happens. They spread it around, but...
Sure. No, you can't do everything. No, you can't do everything. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys were participating. And because this is most of the folks on our board, including your brother, are IETF, and that's our community. And we want to get cross penetration because we're doing the protocols and we want to make sure we have the right people here. Boy, there's so many questions. So let me start. This is an interesting one. I'm not quite sure I understand it. So let me just read it. Maybe you understand it. Suppose you have migrated old data from AES 128 to 256. Is there any way to verify that data is actually encrypted with AES 256 using ciphertext? Or the only way is to use the log?
I guess firstly, I would say migrating from AES 128 to 256 it is a bit like migrating encrypted data. I don't think that really protects it, because once it's encrypted using something weak, although I'm not saying AES-128 is weak, AES-128 is probably going to be fine as long as I'm alive, at least. So that's, again, going from AES-128 to 256, or changing the hashing from whatever SHA-256 to SHA-384 is not the most pressing thing to be doing now. But yeah, this migrating old data from encrypted data, I'm not sure exactly what that does, because
What they may mean is, can you tell from the ciphertext what it was encrypted with, whether it was 256 or 128? Maybe that's what they mean.
Or the ciphertext is bigger.
Maybe that's what they're, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Vadim. This is an incredible presentation. And I really want to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us non-cryptographers or trying our best cryptographers, if you will. Yeah. And so, guys, thank you so much for attending. Please do go up to our website, industrynetworkcouncil.org. We'll have Open SSL next, talking about what they're doing, and we'll have the actual implementations of MLDSA and certs and all that kind of carrying on as well. So thank you all again, and with that, thanks so much. Bye.